Our first delegate for this evening is Andrew Sia, and I would like to welcome Andrew to come forward to the presentation desk right here. I will be timing your delegation, and I'll give you a wave when there is 1 minute remaining. You're allowed up to 5 minutes for your delegation. Please begin when you're ready by pressing the button at the base of the microphone.
Hi, my name is Andrew Sia. I'm here to ask the board to support recommendations in report number 25005 with amended language. In November, a motion was passed to study anti-Semitism and hear Jewish student perspectives. Tackling anti-Semitism is essential to creating an inclusive environment, but only by studying anti-Palestinian racism, anti-Arab racism, and Islamophobia can the board both fully contextualize the rise in anti-Semitism and ensure all students feel safe and welcome at school. Focusing only on anti-Semitism does a disservice to the whole community, both Jews and non-Jews alike. The board needs to be aware of how reports and statistics around anti-Semitic incidents are often biased and unreliable. Make no mistake, there has been a rise in anti-Semitism in Canada, but the available stats about anti-Semitic incidents, such as those from B'nai B'rith, are methodologically unreliable and employ a politically motivated definition of anti-Semitism that encompasses not just hatred and discrimination of Jews, but also criticisms of the state of Israel and legitimate expressions of Palestinian identity. It should be noted that in 2020, B'nai B'rith Canada found there were 29% more anti-Semitic incidents in Canada than in the US, despite a Jewish population that is 15 times smaller. I've personally lived in both countries, and I can say definitively that Canadians are not significantly more hateful than Americans. So the only explanation here is that they employed an overly broad definition of anti-Semitism. Locally, I'm aware that some have labeled everything from the expression Free Palestine to simply having a Palestinian flag as anti-Semitic. It's a fact that most Canadian Jews support the state of Israel and are therefore potentially uncomfortable with expressions of Palestinian identity, Palestinian self-determination, or challenges to the state of Israel. But that's a political discomfort, not a form of hate or anti-Semitism, because the state of Israel is a political entity. No political state is inherent to Judaism as a religion or to the Jewish people. Judaism and Jews have existed for thousands of years, while Zionism is a political movement that began in the late 1800s. Anti-Zionism is not inherently anti-Semitic. To classify criticism or even hostility towards the political entity of Israel as anti-Semitic is both inaccurate and trivializes real forms of Jew hatred. I'm gravely concerned that under the November motion, the board will only hear one perspective, a perspective that may suffer the same methodological issues and biases that plague the B'nai B'rith statistics. If that's the case, Palestinian students will be victimized. No student should be told that wearing their cultural dress is a form of hatred, whether it's a keffiyeh or a dashiki. Or that having a flag of their homeland is discrimination, whether it's the Palestinian or the Canadian flag. But it's precisely these examples of expressing Palestinian identity that I've heard called anti-Semitic by some members of the community. Without a full understanding of anti-Palestinian and anti-Arab racism, I fear that in its attempt to address anti-Semitism, the board will itself engage in discriminatory behavior. And while the effect of that on Palestinian students is more than enough to make adopting the amended recommendations in the report imperative, the potential impact on the Jewish community is also notable. Right now, by treating anti-Semitism differently from and prioritizing it above other forms of hatred, the board is not only giving Jewish students special treatment, but also potentially endorsing forms of anti-Palestinian racism under the guise of combating anti-Semitism. This creates an unsafe environment for Jews, where true incidents of Jew hatred may go unaddressed, diluted by complaints about expression of Palestinian identity or political speech critical of the Israeli state, to which the board will be forced to devote its attention. It also fails to protect other community members who undoubtedly face forms of racism and hatred, which, if this motion is to fail, the board will not seek to understand with the same depth. Schools should be safe for all children, regardless of religion or ethnicity. This includes Jewish students, and it includes Palestinian and Arab and Muslim students. My kids are personally proud to express their Judaism, but I never want them to come home from school and ask why they're allowed to wear a kippah, but their friends can't wear a keffiyeh. I don't want to have to explain to them that to keep them safe at school, the board thinks other students have to hide their cultural identity. Every incident of hate in school is a tragedy, and the board needs to understand and address them all, including anti-Palestinian racism, not just those targeted at people like me.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions for Delegate Andrew Sia this evening? Trustee Rocha.
Yeah, through the chair, thank you for your delegation. At the beginning of the motion, your delegation, you mentioned you wanted the motion in the report to be amended to add some groups. Could you just remind me what those groups are? I want to make sure that I've captured them in my notes.
Certainly. It's my understanding that there was talk of adding an amendment to the motion to include explicitly anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab racism, and Islamophobia.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Ahmed.
Yeah, thank you so much, and very insightful. I really want to thank you for taking your time to come here and delegate. Thank you.
There are no other questions at this time. I wish to thank you very much for your very well thought out approach to your delegation this evening. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next delegate this evening is Lara Omari. Welcome, Lara. I hope I'm saying your name properly. That's Lara. Lara, okay. I'll be timing your delegation, and I will give you a wave when there is 1 minute remaining. You're allowed up to 5 minutes for your delegation. Please begin when you're ready.
Good evening, trustees. Good evening, board members. I'm Lara Omari, with one child in HDSB and another who graduated from HDSB. Pending the results of this report, I do want to know how you pledge to commit your budgetary response to deal with ongoing issues confronting the safety and well-being of our students in Halton schools. It's not enough to detect or identify bias, discrimination, and racism in vague terms and think, oh, there's racism, we must stop it. It's also not sufficient to ignore acknowledgement of the imminent threat to students, be they Palestinian, Arab, Christian, Muslim, or Jewish students. For the tools to address hate and discrimination, I do ask that anti-Palestinian racism be distinctly recognized as a form of anti-Arab racism, and quoting the Arab Canadian lawyers, this silences, excludes, erases, stereotypes, defames, or dehumanizes Palestinians or their narratives. We need the tools and procedures to be aligned to combat hate in all its facets. Schools are safe environments till they're not. Till a keffiyeh is intentionally referred to as a scarf, and Palestine is not on the map the teacher is displaying. So let me start by just unpacking this single tool that we've been asking for, namely the APR mandatory training for every single staff member of HDSB, which will require a budget approved specifically for this purpose In a previous meeting with the HDSB, we were told that there's no budget allocation for APR. And I asked then, where do other districts get the budget for this same kind of training, namely WHDSB? Lack of training on APR is a risk to the well-being of our children, as the long-lasting effects of feeling cancelled, isolated, and ignored are detrimental to the well-being of a child. Not only would we have deprived him or her of their rights, but we've silenced them. The only way to combat hate is through awareness and education. How is a teacher who is confined to one sphere of the world, where media is controlled and coverage is minimal, recognize and understand these issues? It is your moral obligation, as it is mine, and that's why I'm here, that no child is cancelled. The only path forward is to mandate APR training, so no child gets to hear. And these are incidents that I got firsthand from people in my community. No child needs to hear that Palestine is not a country, that you can't hate Israel, that you look like you're PLO, or have a teacher come into the classroom to check on one child but not the other. Palestine is not relevant for you to write it on your Terry Fox sticker. These are real incidents that happened, two of which with my daughter, and the rest from friends in the community. I'm going to ask you here to dig deep into your provincial pockets. I don't know how deep the pockets are of the Ministry of Education, to find the budget to support your goal for creating safe and caring places of learning for all students through strategic training on APR for all staff members. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Lara? Trustee Ahmed.
Thank you again for coming and giving us your time. And I'm really sorry about what your child went through. No child should feel unsafe in our schools. And we should take swift action to counter that.
Thank you.
And we promise that.
And Trustee Rocha?
Through you, Chair, to the delegate. So listening to your delegation this evening, I heard you asking for APR training.
Mandatory training to all staff, yes.
That's not part of this motion here. That's the topic for this evening. So in reading the motion as it's written this evening, are there any specific changes you would like to make to the motion that's going to appear before us this evening?
Definitely, as the gentleman before me said, definitely, we need to align both, or if not all kinds of hate, as a board. But as I said at the start, pending the results of this report is where the next step would be, is to mandate APR training for teachers.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your delegation this evening. As with the previous speaker, you spoke extremely well, very eloquently, and I just want to let everyone know that we, as trustees, will be debating this item after the delegations, which is why you're not hearing very many questions right now. Right now, we're only asking questions of the delegate, but when we get to the actual item, we can ask questions of staff, and so that will answer some of the questions that you're asking in your delegations. Our next delegate this evening is Rishma Mangat. Welcome, Rishma. I'll be timing your delegation, and I'll give you a wave when there is 1 minute remaining. You're allowed up to 5 minutes for your delegation. The button is right in front of the microphone, and you only have to press it once. Please begin when you're ready.
Thank you, and please feel free to wave extra wide if I'm so engrossed in my words I don't see you. Good evening, everybody. Last night there was a session held in Milton that focused on how to recognize, report, and respond to cases of anti-Palestinian racism. There was representation on both the superintendent and trustee side there, which was really nice to see. At this meeting, a trustee from the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board spoke about what she has heard from students, both at that board and within the HDSB, around their experiences of anti-Palestinian racism. So everything from being told they can't wear the kufiya to being told they can't fundraise for Gaza, they can't say the word Palestine, they can't even say the word genocide. She then asked the question, why would an education system want to cover and censor a conversation about genocide? And it is genocide, by the way. I think those who are still debating the validity of this term are far removed from where global humanitarian and legal consensus has been for quite some time now. In her response, she talked about how when we think about education, we often think about it as a neutral site of knowledge dissemination. The curriculum, the methodologies are all neutral, they're objective. But that isn't the case. They are informed and mired, as she said, by a particular ideology, an ideology that prioritizes white supremacy, that prioritizes Eurocentric education. And I'm going to pause here and ask everybody to just check in with themselves and reflect on what they're feeling as I say that. Western, Canadian, Ontarian, Halton curriculum prioritizes white supremacy by default. And it is only through constant advocacy that racialized groups bring about positive change. If you're racialized, that's probably not news to you. If you're not racialized, I would take this opportunity to reflect on how this being knowledge might impact the tendency one might have to support one motion and maybe be a little bit more hesitant to maybe support another. I watched the trustee meeting back from November 5th several times now, and when report 24131 was discussed, there was the idea to bring in other forms of hatred to make it more inclusive, and that was not taken, which was surprising because I thought if we're talking about hate and discrimination, it should include all groups. But now we have this report 25005, and I just want to read the intro paragraphs to both to compare. So student voices on anti-Semitism. Board conduct research to seek insights from self-identified Jewish HDSB students regarding their experience of anti-Semitism on HDSB properties, as well as their feedback on the effectiveness of the HDSB response and existing tools to address hate and discrimination. 25005, student voices on hate and discrimination. That's pretty broad. Which form? The board conduct research to seek insights from all HDSB students regarding their experiences of hate and discrimination at school, as well as their feedback on the effectiveness of the application of existing tools to address hate and discrimination in school. So this, for me, is a perfect example of not just anti-Palestinian racism, but the way that white supremacy is prioritized in schools. Because I read this and I reflect on the conversations that we've had as a community for well over a year with the board now. And one of the things we kept hearing as part of the Zionist one of the reasons we're given is that we can't create an exception for one group of people. We can't treat one group of people exceptionally, and that's why we can't have a lot of the demands we're asking for. But if that's the case, what do you call the difference and discrepancy in just the intro paragraph of these two motions? So what does all that mean for the trustees sitting here today? Hopefully you understand the need to amend the motion, as has been asked already a couple of times, and you may have already received as trustees or will be receiving soon some additional detail around what the amendments are that are being suggested. And then the expectation is, just like it was passed unanimously in November, we expect that the amended motion here will also pass unanimously. If not, I invite people to go and reflect again on some of those internal biases we have. And I would also lastly just like to ask trustees here to take a page and some inspiration from the students that they are supposed to be representing. And you've seen over the last year plus some really remarkable students speak out. And you know, they've spoke out on one of the most critical social justice issues of our time. They see the connections between the ideologies that the board claims to uphold and protect and defend in their multi-year plan. And they also see the hypocrisy of the board if they're not allowed to do some of those things and they're not allowed to speak and they're being silenced. So yeah, that's all I have. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Rishma. Are there any questions for Rishma regarding her delegation?
Thank you. Oh,
Trustee Rocha.
Yep, through you, Chair, to the delegate. Thank you for your delegation. Sorry, you made reference to a proposed amendment. Do you have a proposed amendment?
there is an amendment that has been circulated, and I'm not sure if trustees have it already or will be having it shortly. But there is an amendment to include, further to some of the questions that have already been asked, to make this current motion more specific to anti-Palestinian racism.
All right.
And not just have it be broadly on hate and discrimination, which the board kind of covers off anyway through its equity policies.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Being no further speakers, thank you very much.
Thank
Again,
you.
Rishma, you spoke as eloquently as the ones before you, and we appreciate your sentiments. Thank you. Our next delegate is Mayssaa Kitmitto, and I hope I said that right. Welcome. I will be timing your delegation, and I'll give you a wave when there is 1 minute remaining. You are allowed up to 5 minutes for your delegation. Please begin when you're ready.
Okay, so it's Mayssaa. Good evening, trustees and board members. My name is Mayssaa, and I am here today not just as a proud mother of two remarkable Palestinian students at the HDSB. I address you today from a place of profound concern for the well-being, safety, and mental health of my children and all Palestinian children within the HDSB. I have engaged in heartfelt conversations with many students and families within our Halton Palestinian community. We lean on one another and fostering connections and support. And it is with this connection that I must convey a crucial message. Sorry, this is kind of cutting off? Okay. Must convey a crucial message that your Palestinian students at the HDSB are not okay. It pains me to share that my children, like many other Palestinian children in the school system, as well as allies, feel fearful to speak up about Palestinian human rights because they are faced with relentless anti-Palestinian racism. And this is not a matter of isolated incidents. It is a common struggle that has persisted throughout their educational journey. As a mother, I wrestle with a lot of emotions, worry, frustration, and even fear. Fear for the mental health and safety of my children. My son has been subjected to hurtful slurs. He's been called terrorist and many times has been urged to suppress his identity because Palestine is not recognized by the West. He has been confronted with questions that undermine our humanity, our lived experiences, and history. One question he's usually asked is, why should we feel sympathy for Palestinians when they're part of the terrorist problem? There's also a troubling moment that I must share when a racist comment was made in a classroom to my son about Palestine and his identity. The teacher heard, smiled knowingly, and continued the lesson as if nothing had happened and nothing was said. Experiences like this may seem minor to some, but they cast long shadows on my son and our family. Like many Palestinian students, my kids feel marginalized, as if their lived experiences are invisible because they dare to embrace their Palestinian identity. The fallout of APR extends far beyond mere words. It cultivates an environment of fear, exclusion, and isolation for our Palestinian students. Many are profoundly affected by the ongoing genocide in Gaza, witnessing the suffering of their people, families, and friends on a daily basis. The trauma they endure follows them into the classroom as they grapple with the painful reality of their loved ones being targeted back home. They wear brave faces, but when they arrive at school, they have little to no support, and therefore they go unheard. Some educators even perpetuate the cycle of pain through racist remarks, pushing our children further into silence to avoid further humiliation and dehumanization. Recently, we have witnessed a troubling surge in incidents where Palestinian students feel unsafe and unfairly discriminated against, from being labeled as terrorists to being told you started the war or told that Palestinians don't exist. They are denied their fundamental rights to express their thoughts and experiences concerning the genocide and ethnic cleansing against the Palestinians. Today, I stand before you with a call to action to prioritize the mental health and well-being of our students, our Palestinian children. I ask that you amend this motion to specifically address anti-Palestinian racism, anti-Arab racism, and Islamophobia. By focusing on this critical issue, you will create an environment where Palestinian students feel safe to speak out and share their experiences. It will also foster trust among students and us parents, but it will also demonstrate that their voices will be heard and valued. It will also shed light to the challenges Palestinian students face and highlight the gaps that demand our urgent attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayssaa. Are there any questions for our delegate? Seeing none, thank you very much for your eloquence and for your personal stories. It's very, very sad to hear.
Thank you.
Thank you. And our final delegate for this evening is Yousef Jamous. Welcome, Yousef. As I've stated, now if this is my fifth time, I'll be timing your delegation, and I will give you a wave when there is 1 minute remaining. You are allowed up to 5 minutes for your delegation. Please begin when you're ready.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Yousef, and I'm a proud Palestinian Canadian and a parent of children attending HDSB schools. I am deeply invested in ensuring that all students, regardless of their background, are treated with dignity, respect, and equity. I stand here tonight deeply concerned about the report 25005 presented to this board on its current form, where I see it as a clear manifestation of anti-Palestinian racism or APR. Let me start by pointing out the stark double standards on display. Compare today's report titled Student Voices on Hate and Discrimination to report 24131 presented on November 5th, 2024, titled Student Voices on Antisemitism. The language speaks volumes. One report was specific and unapologetic in naming antisemitism, while today's motion is vague, generic, and evasive. This sends a clear message to families of certain identities are worth naming and protecting, while others are ignored, silenced, or erased. This reminds me of Duncan Campbell Scott, a man who spoke about equity while implementing policies to erase indigenous cultures. Is this the legacy you want to emulate? Look further at the recommendations in today's report. It calls the board to seek insight from all HDSB students regarding their experiences of hate and discrimination. Now let's compare this to the November 5th report, which called for research specifically on experiences of Jewish students facing antisemitism. Why the change in approach? Why does the Palestinian community and their allies not deserve the same focused attention? This is another blatant example of APR, of suppressing Palestinian voices and erasing their identity. Then there is the analysis section of today's report, which curiously mentions anti-Semitism yet again, even though it was addressed in its own report and motion last November. Why the repeated emphasis on one form of racism while others like APR remain sidelined? What message does this send? That some forms of hate are more important than others? That some communities deserve protection while others are expendable? The Palestinian community and their allies have reached out to this board repeatedly. They have engaged with the director, with the staff, and trustees. They have shared their concerns about APR in HDSB schools. And yet, this report does not reflect their voices. Instead, it prioritizes the silencing of Palestinians and their allies. Let's look at another angle of November 2024 report and motion. A single delegation from parent along meeting with Jewish community led to the swift creation of Mayssaa motion to study anti-Semitism, despite, to my knowledge, no documented incidents of anti-Semitism in HDSB schools. Meanwhile, multiple parents have delegated and written to this board about APR, and there is clear evidence of APR in HDSB schools that was reported and circulated on social media. Yet, the board has taken no meaningful action. My ask to HDSB, this report to be approved only after being amended to explicitly name APR. It must include Palestinian voices in its creation. Anything less is a clear violation of HDSB's own code of conduct, which claims to promote equity and inclusion. Some trustees might argue, we cannot keep creating motions for each and every type of racism. My response to that is simple. Why didn't you think of that when anti-Semitism report and motion was brought forward? Why did you rush to address one form of racism while dismissing others, especially APR, which has been repeatedly raised by members of the community? If the board is now questioning the need of focused motions, it exposes the double standards at play and further validates claims of APR. Finally, let me make this absolutely clear. Failure to amend this report to focus on APR and then pass it unanimously, similar to the anti-Semitism motion last November, will be undeniable proof that APR has a home in HDSB. It will send a loud and clear message to the community that human rights in HDSB are only applicable to certain groups, while others are left out in the cold. Trustees, the choice is yours. Do you want to be remembered as Duncan Campbell Scotts of our time, spreading injustice and erasing marginalized voices? Or do you want to be remembered as those who stood for equity, inclusion, and justice? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for this delegate? Thank you very much, Yousef.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing us to take that brief break. We are now up to section 4, items for ratification action. And we have our first action item for this evening, Student Voices on Hate and Discrimination, Report 25005, submitted by Vice Chair Oliver, Trustee Ahmed, and Trustee Amos. Be it resolved that the board conduct research to seek insights from all HDSB students regarding their experiences of hate and discrimination at school, as well as their feedback on the effectiveness of the application of existing tools to address hate and discrimination in school, and that a report summarizing the results be presented to the board in May 2025. Vice Chair Oliver, would you move this motion?
I move this motion.
Trustee Ahmed, will you second this motion?
I do second it.
As the mover, Trustee Oliver, would you like to speak to this report?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Chair, to my fellow trustees. Since I became a trustee, and I'm sure long before that, HDSB has been committed to equity and inclusion and protection of human rights. In fact, this is once again a commitment in our new multi-year strategic plan. And so is kindness, connection, and community. I know that the work to support these commitments has been ongoing at every level of this organization. And this work, I believe, will continue with relentless dedication. There is no lack of inspiration, compassion, or empathy in our school board. I am pleased to bring forward this report in motion, along with Trustees Ahmed and Amos. There's a lot of divisiveness in our society. There's also conflict and intolerance in every part of the world, each publicized to a different extent, affecting different segments of the global population. All of this is clearly visible to the most vulnerable members of our society, our children. And sadly, often these global conflicts and actions spill into our schools and often influence behaviors within our school communities, affecting students and staff alike. Anti-Palestinian racism and anti-Semitism has heightened due to the war in the Middle East. These are certainly in the spotlight presently. And there are many other forms of pervasive hatred and discrimination in our society, such as sexism and misogyny, anti-Black racism, homophobia and transphobia, ageism, xenophobia, among others. These are also of concern. They exist and they affect our students. In 2021, staff conducted a study around anti-Black racism at HDSB. In November, we approved a motion around conducting research around experience of anti-Semitism on HDSB properties. These have laid solid groundwork for research into hate and discrimination as experienced by our students. Every student matters. And so in the spirit of the 2 multi-year strategic plan commitments I've listed earlier, and given the diversity of students and staff in our schools, we must explore all forms of hatred and discrimination being experienced by our students and how they manifest in our schools. Ignoring certain forms of hate and discrimination can send the message that they are acceptable or not as important. It is important to address all forms of hatred and discrimination as they undermine mutual respect, compassion, unity, inclusion, and general goodwill to all. Chair, I would like to make 2 amendments to this motion.
Please, go ahead.
Okay. The first is I would like to change the timeline. In my consultation with staff, I believe that a report in June is more feasible and will allow more time for the research department for this critical study. It is absolutely my belief that the study methodology will address all forms of hate and discrimination, including specifically APR, giving it the same level of as anti-Semitism study. And I appreciate this is of concern to the members of the Palestinian community. The second amendment is that in the motion itself, I would like to add all to the, let me just find the wording here. Yeah. Experiences of hate and discrimination at school, including anti-Palestinian racism, anti-Arab racism, and Islamophobia. And I so move.
Is there a seconder for this motion? Trustee Ahmed?
I'll second it.
Okay. We now have an amendment on the floor. Are there speakers to the amendment? Trustee Shuttleworth, are you speaking to the motion?
Yes, and I have a question.
Yep.
I'm sorry. I hope you can hear me. I'm in the car. I'm on my way. So, Vice Chair Oliver, I'm just wondering, with the amendment that you made, the second amendment that you made, why have you only chosen 3 areas to highlight versus leaving it as that blanket statement of looking at hate across the board?
Okay, so through you, Chair, certainly the plan is that this study will look at all forms of hate and discrimination. And as I said, I believe the previous 2 studies have laid the groundwork in terms of methodology to be able to specifically address each form of hate and discrimination. And that will be also specific to anti-Palestinian racism, anti-Arab racism, and Islamophobia.
So can I follow up? So I'm just concerned that by doing that, we still are neglecting all the other forms of race. You know, one of the concerns, so I came in for the last delegation, and one of the things was that we are focusing specifically on certain types of hate rather than a blanket of all types of hate. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around the rationale behind focusing in when this motion in its sort of beginning was about the idea that we are wanting to ensure that we are not excluding any forms of hate. So I'm just trying to figure out why in this amendment that you've made, we seem to now focus specifically on anti-Palestinian, anti-Islamophobia, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the last one.
Mm-hmm. Through your chair to Trustee Shuttleworth, I do not believe that any of the other forms of hatred or discrimination will be omitted or not addressed. I believe that our research department is very capable in building their methodology to address every form of hate and discrimination in their in how they address the students and the kind of information that they seek to attain from the students. So I don't think this is doing any disservice. I fully believe that we will be looking at hate and discrimination, period, across the board. Every student's voice will be heard. Every student will be able to express what type of hate and discrimination they experience and how it manifests in our school environment. And I would refer you to the body of the report, and if you could recall my preamble, as for me, the impetus is, I want every student to feel safe in our school, and I don't want any student to feel that they're discriminated for any reason. Thank you.
Okay, I've asked Dr. Bashaglia, our research department lead, to come forward and address whether or not she believes she can conduct this research and specifically target the different areas so that all students are equally represented in the surveys and in the report.
Thank you very much. Through your chair, I think as Vice Chair Oliver has mentioned, including anti-Palestinian, Islamophobia, and anti-Arab specifically in the motion does not limit the outreach to every community. We do represent every student in HDSB. I think including it really solidifies the motion in that it's in response to current geographical realities. The motion begins with those three words. The research department supports the entire multi-strategic plan. We collaborate closely with the Human Rights and Equity Department and the Indigenous Education Department. So I will take back this motion to those colleagues, and we will look at a methodology that will be inclusive, notwithstanding that we, deviate from the original motion that was given to us in November. But certainly we will prioritize the anti-Palestinian, Islamophobia, and anti-Arab as well in the research.
Thank you for that response. Trustee Shuttleworth, did you have a follow-up?
I'll leave it for now. I'll leave it for now. Thank you.
Trustee Zhang.
Thank you, Chair. So when I see that the reported motion, I believe we need to do this as early as possible, such a study. And because before when we discussed a lot about the suspension, and so we need the data to support it. So first, if we want to have a mechanism to mitigate or conquer those challenges, then we need to understand what is the situation we have. So, but this report, I will recommend a defer and to include several more updates about the expectations and the standards we can have. So one is in scientific research, any research schema may have two kind of errors. This is a technical error.
I just want to reflect that we are discussing the amendment to the motion. We're not discussing, we have a motion on the floor regarding making an amendment to the motion. We're not talking about the motion itself. So if you would like to speak to the motion itself and deferring the motion itself, that would belong after we vote on the amendment.
Okay, so for the amendment about to including the three new category, I believe if we for the data accuracy, so anti-Palestine and anti-Arab can have intersection. So how to prevent that for the data accuracy is a question. So maybe we just add one, not add both of them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Amos.
Thank you, through you. I also had similar concerns to Trustee Shuttleworth, and may I make a suggestion that after the anti-Palestinian and anti-Arab and I can't remember the third one, we also say, and the many other forms of hate and discrimination, or because I think when I read the motion as a standalone, you need to make sure that it actually states and that we capture all those other forms. So I think it needs to be up in the part. And while we're highlighting those three, I do think we need to also say as well as the others.
Let me just reread what the motion would be if it's amended as suggested by the motion to amend. Be it resolved that the board conduct research to seek insights from all HDSB students regarding their experiences of hate and discrimination at school, including anti-Palestinian racism, anti-Arab racism, and Islamophobia, as well as their feedback on the effectiveness of the application of existing tools to address hate and discrimination in school, and that a report summarizing the results be presented to the board in June 2025. The body of the report lists a number of other types of hatred and discrimination, and so they are contained within the report and would be included in those areas of hate and discrimination. It doesn't need to be specifically stated in the motion that all of the other forms of hate and discrimination are included, because they are in the body of the report. Is that okay?
So can I follow up?
Yes, you can.
Thank you. So in my view, then, we either, if we put the First Amendment in, we need to say as well as all other forms, or we eliminate them all. Because if we're looking at the body of the report, we already have that information. And I understand wanting to highlight the anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab, but I also believe that if we're going to mention some, we need to capture them all.
Okay, so are you making a motion to amend the amendment?
Yes.
Okay, so well, what I'm going to ask is, Vice Chair Oliver, do you accept this as a friendly amendment to add in as well as all other forms of hatred and discrimination?
I do, and I have some wording suggestions that maybe will help with that. Because the impetus for this was to look at all forms of hate and discrimination, and we've outlined many of the key that we know. Perhaps if we amend to say all HDSB students regarding their experiences of all forms of hate and discrimination at school, including list the three among others, and then continue on. So it makes it clear that we're looking at all.
Could it be as well as all others?
Sure. Okay, so as well as all others. And that is acceptable to the mover and the seconder. Okay, thank you. And now we will move on to Trustee Ahmed.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. So I am hearing, like, why can't we include anti-Arab and anti-Palestinian racism together, they are distinct. They have some intersectionality, but they are distinct. Palestinians are confined to one region, they are Arabs, but they are Palestinians because they belong to a land. So if we take away their identity, nothing remains. So Palestinians remain Palestinians, Arabs, and also remain Arabs. And also, Palestinians are not only Muslims, they are Christians, they are Jews. So Palestinians have to be called Palestinians with a distinct identity.
Thank you for that distinction, Trustee Ahmed. Trustee Rocha.
Through you, Chair, I'm having a hard time following what version of the motion we're debating. Would it be possible to write the motion and present it on the board so we can follow what the recommended changes are?
Yeah.
That
Okay.
would be my suggestion. So
So
that we're
I will read it out loud so that Manager Khan can get the whole thing. Yeah. So, yeah.
okay. So that was my a request. The
Okay,
other question.
I'm getting to.
Yeah. No. I just want to. Oh, you're going to read it.
Yeah,
now.
we're going to do it now.
Okay.
Okay, so after school, comma, including anti-Palestinian racism, anti-Arab racism, Islamophobia, as well as all other forms of hatred and discrimination. And then the very last word or the second last word in the second part of the motion, June instead of May. And if we can get that displayed on the screen, that would be wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so this is the amended motion that we are looking to have our debate on. And now let's go back to Trustee Rocha if she has a follow-up question.
So from listening to Trustee Amos, and she was one of the authors of the report presented this evening, it's almost like we can go one of two ways. You either amend this report to highlight APR, anti-Arab racism, and Islamophobia, or you can remove that and keep it generic and really encompass the goal of the original report, which is to capture every form of hate and discrimination. One of the delegates this evening talked about, we did a report on anti-Black racism, and then we did one on anti-Semitism. And you're right, like looking back, maybe we shouldn't be doing these ad hoc reports. Maybe we should just do one blanket one that would encompass everybody. Because you know what, come June, the 2S LGBTQ community might come and say, well, we want one just for us. So I think maybe let's start the new year fresh on a clean slate and put forward a motion that captures everybody. and however anyone identifies, because I think no matter how thorough we think we are going to be by including these names, inevitably we might miss something. We don't even know what we don't know. So I would be of the mind of not including it in the motion, with the understanding that that will be looked at. With that said, I would also look to maybe Dr. Bishalia with the motion we did pass in November, and can we somehow incorporate the motion that we passed in November with this motion that we hope to pass this evening? So instead of having a standalone for anti-Semitism and this new one here, could we somehow do just one so that there's no one left out and we're not, so that there's no one left out?
Yeah. So where that takes me is a question to Trustee Baxter regarding the motion already passed on anti-Semitism. If this motion was to remain in its original form, would you be willing to bring forward a motion to rescind the one that has already been passed on anti-Semitism so that we can take a broad approach to all forms of hatred and discrimination, not just ones faith-based or politically based, so that nobody will feel that they have been discriminated against by having a broad motion for one and having a specific motion for the other.
Thank you, through the chair to the chair. It's a difficult question to answer because we have not heard about the work that was passed in November, so I'm not quite sure what the plan is for that. And I wonder if we understood that better, if it would be easier to answer that question. In general, I think when we were discussing that motion, Trustee Ahmed suggested adding to that motion, and we decided not to do that. He mentioned that there was a sharp rise in anti-Semitism and evidence of rising cases of Islamophobia and anti-Palestinian discrimination. There's nothing in this report that speaks. There's nothing in this report that speaks to Islamophobia at all. So I have greater concerns about the report and the motion. And I would agree with Trustee Zhang that perhaps we should defer to next month and create a motion as well as a thorough supporting report that honors what we've heard this evening from all of our delegates and their desires, and ensure that it's inclusive. I'm concerned that we're making some changes on the fly. But to answer your specific question, as I said, it's a bit difficult to know whether we should rescind the old motion without really knowing what's happening with that motion and what the plan was, and whether or not that work could be rolled into a bigger project. I don't really have information to answer that question.
Okay, then I'm going to go to Rosanna Biscaglia again and ask her what the current status is on the anti-Semitism work, and if it would be simpler to have one motion to work with than two.
Thank you very much. Through your chair, it would be simpler to have one motion as opposed to two motions. I think the work that has taken place to date would not have any bearing on rescinding the motion presented in November and moving forward with a more holistic motion that would support every student as aligned with our multi-year strategic plan.
Okay, so we now have another option ahead of us. Yes, go ahead, Director Ennis.
Thank you so much, Chair Collard. I know that we're grappling with the various motions that are before us, the one from November and the one before us tonight, and the various iterations that we are contemplating. I feel that we should honor the motion that was passed in November. I believe that there are a number of Jewish families and students who are expecting us to do the work that we committed to doing. I also believe that we should also listen to and include specifically what we heard tonight about anti-Palestinian racism, anti-Arab racism, and Islamophobia. And so I believe these two things can coexist. And so I would not really be in favor of rescinding or deferring, because time is also of the essence. And so if we defer, the window to do the work has really collapsed on us. And so I would say that we honor the motions that's already passed, and we are already started to do some work around that. And I say we also do the work that's before us tonight as presented. It does not in any way preclude us from doing work on all forms of racism, which has always been our position. And so I am not fearful that others might come forward, because we're doing a number of work always on an ongoing basis, even those not listed here. So that would be Dr. Biselio.
Yes, sorry, just to clarify, I too would not be in support of deferring. The research department is ready to hit the ground running in February. The anti-Semitism has been prioritized because, as I mentioned, this was a motion that came to us in November. But absolutely, whether it's one motion or two motions come February, we will be hitting the floor running to conduct the focus groups. And having heard the delegates here today, it is clear that there is a need to include anti-Palestinian, Islamophobia, and anti-Arab as issues as well. And so those voices would be gathered as well alongside February.
Thank you for that. So what I'm hearing is that rescinding the motion wouldn't make things any easier, and the changes that have been suggested here don't make it more difficult. Okay, back to our speakers list. Trustee Rocha, you had used up all your time, so if you want to ask another question, please go back on the list. And now I have Trustee Danielli.
Thank you very much. And it's really just a very quick thing. It's the English major in me. I wonder if a friendly amendment, if we could look at, the motion just disappeared. It was on the screen. But I was thinking that it would be a little more elegant if it said including but not limited to, rather than adding the verbiage at the end. That was just going to be my suggestion.
So Trustee Danielli's suggestion is that it should say including but not limited to anti-Palestinian racism, anti-Arab racism, and Islamophobia, and leaving it at that, because to her way of phrasing, that also incorporates all other forms of hatred and discrimination. I'm amenable to either way, but I'm not the mover or the seconder. Is there a preference?
Not really, but yeah, it actually covers everything, and I think it should please everyone.
It should be the way it is now?
Yeah, I don't see any problem.
Okay.
Because this catches the spirit of the motion anyway.
Vice Chair Oliver is nodding her head in agreement with you. So we're going to move forward to the next speaker then, if Trustee Danielli doesn't have a follow-up.
Point of order, I would just ask if Trustee Amos was on board, because she is also one of the authors of the report.
Right. Trustee Amos, are you all right with keeping the phrasing the way it is, or changing it to the way Trustee Danielli has suggested?
I appreciate Trustee Danielli's input, and I really like it, so thank you.
Okay, so what Trustee Danielli has suggested is that the change be including but not limited to anti-Palestinian racism, anti-Arab racism, and Islamophobia, instead of including APR, AAR, Islamophobia, as well as all other forms of hatred and discrimination. It's much shorter to do it the way Trustee Danielli has said, and a little bit cleaner Trustee Amos is accepting that change, but she's not the mover or the seconder. So I need to know if changing it to the way Trustee Amos has suggested is acceptable to Trustee Ahmed and Vice Chair Oliver. Yep.
Okay, through your chair. Thank you. I do like that suggestion. The goal is to look at all forms of hate and discrimination, and perhaps that wording should be added. So looking at students regarding their experiences of all forms of hate, discrimination, and racism at schools, including but not limited to. This is getting kind of clunky wording, right? It's getting awkward because we're trying to honor and respect everybody, and it's impossible because we're trying to list as well. But I think as that reads right now, I am okay with that.
And as the seconder to that amendment, are you agreeable to that, Trustee Ahmed?
Yeah, it does look cleaner, as you said. I'm okay with that. Yeah.
Okay. Trustee Danielli, are you all right with the changes that you suggested and the way that they're being worded now?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Now moving on to it's all second time speakers now. Trustee Shuttleworth.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So I think I appreciate what Trustee Danielli has given here. My worry or my concern is by singling out the particular areas of hate, somewhat similar to what Trustee Rocha said, is we don't know what's going to happen in the future. But by doing this, I do wonder, just even looking at the delegates, and I only saw the last delegate of this evening, is that in doing that singling out, it's again creating that divisive nature rather than what I felt was the original spirit of the motion, which was to look at everything. So if we're looking at everything, we're looking at everything. By doing this, we are focusing specifically on anti-Palestinian racism, anti-Arab racism, and Islamophobia. So I just worry if that's all within the body of the motion, which is what you came back to before when I spoke to it before. You said, well, the rest of it's in the body of the motion, but is this not too in the body of the motion?
Not all of them. Anti-Arab racism is not in the body of the motion, and I believe Islamophobia is not in the body of the motion. I'm not sure on that.
So then if the others are in the body of the motion, could they not all be included in the, rather than singling out specifics in here, have them all included of the body of the motion so that again it is seen as we are addressing all hate. Hate is hate, regardless of what hate it is focused on. So if we have all of the different pieces of hate within the body, that to me seems more equitable in when we're looking at where that hate is from.
Could I just remind the gallery that you're here as spectators at this point, and if we're hearing noise from the gallery, it makes it more difficult for us to have our debate at the table. So please remember that. Trustee Shuttleworth, in response to your question, I know you only heard the last delegate. So the major point that was made through the 5 delegations we had this evening was that we had a motion in November that was specific to anti-Semitism, and that one of their big concerns is the erasure of Palestine. And by not having a motion that specifically identifies Palestine as a concern for hatred and discrimination, that we are in effect erasing Palestine, and that is not something that anyone at this table wishes to do, which is why we are looking at modifying the motion to include that so that we are treating anti-Semitism and APR equitably. Is that...
Yeah, I understand. I get that. I recognize the hurt. I recognize where everybody is coming from in this room. I just worry of the divisiveness of calling out names. And again, I'm not sure if there's a way to tie the motions to, like even in here, mention alongside of whatever the number of the motion that Trustee Baxter put forward, just so that you're still seeing that this is looking at everyone. I just worry that by doing this, as Trustee Rocha said, in the future, we'll have similar. We had 5 delegations tonight, and again, I'm so sorry I was working. I wasn't able to get here to hear all of the delegations, but we want to eliminate all hate in our board. Nobody wants hate. Nobody wants any hate. So by, I don't even know how to explain this, but by singling out, are we not creating more? That's just my concern.
Okay. I'm sorry, I have to ask again, the gallery, please remain quiet. Thank you. Okay, Trustee Shuttleworth, you have gone over your time, so you've made your point, I think. Trustee Zhang.
Thank you, Chair. My concern about adding the 3 is only the wording. So the wording, because we have added anti-APR and anti-Arab racism and Islamophobia. As you heard, I'm consistent. Before I said many times, for my personal, I never use any word like phobia, because I believe this word is very politicalized. And now for this study, actually, we are surveying the students. They are children. And for children, we should have a more neutral words and just to let them know this is a discrimination if there's anything anti-Palestinian or anti-Arab. So these things we need to address. We should not use any words. Those words will plant a seed for future hate. So we don't want to see any community division, and the community, we have a polarization, so we need a harmony community. So for those words, so I just want to use those words, consider change the wording. So I would say just to use the discrimination targeting the Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim community. So these words should be more suitable for this, like surveying the students, not because they are not adult. A lot of students, they don't understand what it is. So we need to explain that. Thank you.
I'm going to ask you again, Dr. Bishaglia, would the phrasing that you use in your conversations and surveys with students be age appropriate?
Thank you for the question. Through your chair, just to clarify, the methodology would be focus groups, which would be conversations. And in line, in keeping with the methodology that we used for the student voice on anti-Black racism, it would be secondary students. So this would be grade 9 and above. My understanding of working with students is that they're quite aware of the social justice, political situations, the global situations. So for communities who face racism and discrimination, those terms would not be new. They would actually appreciate the fact that, HDSB is using terms that captures their experiences. And these are terms that are out in social media. These are not terms that we are coming up. These are legal terms. These are terms that are accepted by the Human Rights Code. So we would be in keeping with those terms.
Thank you very much for that. Moving on to our next speaker, Trustee Bryden.
Thank you. My question is in regards to the second part of the amendment, which is setting the time for this report. When we passed the motion in November, we moved to an April delivery for that report, which was an ambitious ask of the research department at the time. With a much broader scope in this report, my first question is, is June actually feasible? And yeah, we'll start there.
Through your chair, no doubt this is a large request and a large volume of information that we'll be gathering. We have a methodology in mind that will help us to be quite efficient with our time. And again, we'll be using the methodology that we use for the student voice report, so we're not reinventing the wheel, and we're ready to go as of February.
Is there a follow-up?
There is. Now, I'll pause for now.
Thank you. Trustee Baxter.
Thank you. Through the chair, I just, in terms of the amendment, I'm reading the original motion again, which when I saw it in our package, I immediately sent an email to the authors to express my support for it, as I expressed support for broader work in November as well. I think in modifying the motion, we might be sort of forgetting what the purpose was, and it's to hear from all students about any hate or discrimination they have experienced. So I don't think, and I don't want to speak for Dr. Busheglia, but I would imagine the way that the design is set up is students will be encouraged to share all information and all experiences that they have had and how they've interpreted those. And I believe that if there's any student who's interpreting experience as hate or discrimination against themselves, that they will be given the opportunity to do that and we will hear about it. So I'm not really clear on why we're adding specific types of hate and discrimination to the motion itself. The motion is intended to provide staff with direction, and I think the original motion does that. The body and the report is certainly missing things, as I mentioned before. Trustee Ahmed talked about Islamophobia in November, but it was missing from the report now. I don't really know, and might look to Manager Khan, if we adopt a motion and there's things that we wished we had included in the report or in the analysis, I'm not sure if that really matters. It's really about the direction that's being provided to staff, and I think that the spirit of that is maintained in the original motion, that we are expecting and asking staff to seek insight from all students about any hate or discrimination that they have perceived against themselves in our schools, as well as their feedback on the effectiveness of any mitigation. So I'm not sure that we need to amend, and I understand those who have expressed concern about other groups perhaps feeling that they have been forgotten. I know in the fall of 2023, I attended a presentation by the Halton police who shared with us the data they had for our region. And there had been a dramatic increase in anti-Semitic hate incidents and very closely followed by a dramatic increase in anti-Black racism. In our schools, some of the schools where we were hearing about anti-Semitism, we also heard from parents in those schools concerned about absenteeism on June 1st in 2023. So we were hearing about homophobia. So I'm just concerned, as I think Trustee Shuttleworth has pointed out, we don't want to miss anybody by putting too much into a motion that I think was well written to start with. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Baxter. Moving on to Student Trustee Ochu.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I have to agree with Trustee Baxter and Trustee Shuttleworth on how the original motion, I believe, encompassed all forms of hate. And I can speak for experience at the schools that I've been at. When a specific group is highlighted in, yes, exactly, when a specific group is highlighted in a motion to protect them, it makes it worse according to the students because they feel that that group has a higher sort of advantage and leverage on them because they are being actively protected by a school board. Well, the students that aren't being mentioned in the motion feel like they aren't being supported directly. I definitely understand why this amendment proposition was made, but I feel that by including these specific groups, it may not include other groups that are also affected by hate.
Thank you. And moving to Trustee Ahmed.
Thank you, Chair, through you. So I'm hearing that it is divisive to mention APR and anti-Arab racism and Islamophobia. And but we are still okay with the motion that we passed in November. That's why I mentioned when we were debating the motion on anti-Semitism, I mentioned that let's include APR, Islamophobia, and all kinds of hate in that motion so that we don't end up in this situation. But I was told that let's not dilute the spirit of the motion. So now we are sitting here debating why we are mentioning anti-Palestinian racism, why we are mentioning anti-Arab racism, why we are mentioning Islamophobia. It's going to create divisions. So what happened to the motion passed in November? Why?
Please remain quiet in the gallery.
And also, Director Ennis has already confirmed that the staff is in a position to support all kinds of motions, even if a separate group brings another motion, another delegation to have another study, the staff is in a position to support another study, and they're not shying away from their responsibilities. So I think, in all fairness, we include anti-Palestinian racism, anti-Arab racism, Islamophobia, and pass this motion and show that we are not inherently racist. Because whatever we want to do, our actions will speak louder than our words. Whatever we do, our actions are going to be on record. They're going to speak louder than anything else.
Thank you, Trustee Ahmed. And our final speaker, Trustee Rocha.
Through you, Chair. I'm going to address something Trustee Ahmed just said, in that we're looking at diluting the motion. I don't think we are. I think what happened in November, it was focused on one group. It was focused on anti-Semitism. I think the original report that you authored this evening, you put forth, as well with Trustee Oliver and Trustee Amos, a motion that would encapsulate everybody, including anti-Palestinian racism, anti-Arab racism, Islamophobia, anti-Black racism, and all the other racisms in there. So I think when I first read the report as part of my package, I looked at it and I go, yes, this is an inclusive motion, and we're going to get away from what one of the delegates said is creating these reports every month because a topic came up that's difficult and we need to address it. So I think the motion that you presented this evening that was generic and that captures every single student, no matter who they are, puts us in a position that we're not going to come back here in a few months because we missed something. And now, the other thing I want to point out is by including the words that are bolded, it doesn't change the scope of the research. Every single 60,000 plus student will be impacted, whether we put those words in there or not. And I think to what student trustee Oshu said, when we start, and Trustee Shuttleworth, is when we start pointing out specific groups, we do cause divisiveness, and we see that because we're guilty of it, because here we are, we're being called out for being divisive. So I think in the original spirit of the motion that was put forth for inclusivity and all forms of hate and discrimination, my preference would be to not include the words that are bolded. But at the end of the day, those groups will be included in this report. So I'm going to support this regardless, because the intent is to do a study on all forms of hate and discrimination. I'm going to support it. My preference would be to remove the words that from including to Islamophobia. My preference would be to remove them so that we stop the divide right now and we move forward in a very inclusive fashion.
Okay, I see 2 people have added their names to the list. Is it something absolutely new that you wish to say?
No, it's a clarification, but not
Okay, go ahead then.
I wanted to clarify from Dr. Bisheklia that regardless of whether this amendment is made or not, the work will look identical in either situation. Is that correct?
Through your chair, we operationalize the work alongside the Human Rights and Equity Department and the Indigenous Rights and Education Department. Those are the 2 departments that support the 2 priority areas in the multi-year strategic plan. And we support students who are Arabic, we support students who identify as Muslim, and we support students who are Palestinian. So yes, the work would entail reaching out to those communities. I will also mention that, one learning that I had in speaking with students back in 2021 when the Student Voice Report was done on the anti-Black racism is that when we use terms like all, the all becomes so generic and so general that it becomes nobody. It's hard to see the all. And so for communities that feel silenced and that feel unseen, they might not necessarily see themselves in the all. And so it's helpful to build trust with those communities by using terms that they themselves have asked us to use, to let them know it's an olive branch, to let them know that we see them, we respect them, and we're there for them. So just another piece of information as you continue in your discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I just want to say that this report is not centered on racism alone. We have many forms of hate: sexism, misogyny, ageism, ableism, socioeconomic status, LGBTQ+. There are many forms of hate and discrimination, and this report will report on all of those. But by highlighting these 3 groups, we elevate Palestinian culture and heritage to a place that is equivalent to that of Jewish culture and tradition and history. And that is what the community is asking for here. And I think it's extremely important that we do that. And I will be supporting this motion. Now, Trustee Ahmed. Trustee Ahmed, you may have the last word.
Thank you, Chair, through you. And thank you to everyone who's supporting tonight. And also the community is looking at us, looking up to us actually, to support them. And I'll just give one analogy, maybe I don't know how appropriate it is, that if our finger is cut, we don't apply bandage to the entire body. We just address that wound that is on the finger. So that's what we are doing. A section of our community, section of our society is hurting. We are addressing their hurt. So it's not going to take away the pain from other people. Whenever anybody is going to approach us, we are here to listen to them, address their hurt, and we're going to take swift action. That's why we are here. So doing the work for APR and anti-Arab racism and Islamophobia is not going to diminish other people's sufferings or anything. Whoever approaches us, we're going to give them our time and we're going to take swift action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Ahmed. We will now vote on the amendment. This is not the main motion. This is the amendment.
So, point of clarification, please. Is the amendment adding the bolded?
Yes, the amendment is the bolded phrasing.
Can we separate the two, please?
Yes, we can. So that means it'll be 2 votes. Okay? So the amended motion is only the first part, not the date. And then we will vote again on the second part.
Point of clarification.
Yes.
We're voting on what is on the board, 2 separate motions. In case it fails, we then vote on the original wording, correct?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Just have to give Manager Khan a minute. Yeah. And at this time, Dr. Pasheglia, I would just like to thank you so much for being here this evening and providing us with so much relevant information so that we can make informed decisions. Thank you. Please cast your votes. Trustee Amos and Trustee Danielli. And Trustee Danielli.
My apologies. I'm hitting the vote button and nothing's working. I'm trying to vote yes.
Oh, okay. There we go. And that vote does pass, but not unanimously. Voting yes, Trustee Amos, Trustee Danielli, Trustee Ahmed, Trustee Bryden, Vice Chair Oliver, and myself. Voting no, Trustee Zhang, Trustee Gray, Trustee Shuttleworth, Trustee Baxter, and Trustee Rocha. Now we will vote on the date change. Please cast your votes. Trustee Zhang? Thank you. That passes unanimously. Now we will vote on the entire motion. Which includes all of the language that we just changed. Okay? Does anyone need me to read it? Okay. Setting the topic, please cast your votes. Okay, that passed, but not unanimously. We had 1 trustee, Trustee Zhang, voting against. Thank you very much. So that motion passes. Thank you for coming this evening and letting your voices be heard. Thank you.